Welcome to Design Domination, where you'll learn to become a better, more business-savvy designer so you can dominate your competition. Hi, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Colleen Grotzer, and in this episode of Design Domination, I'm joined by Blair Enns. Stay tuned to find out how to take back some power in the client-designer relationship, pricing do's and don'ts, how not to sell, how to deal with mindset issues, and much more. Blair Enns is on a mission to change the way that creative services are bought and sold the world over. He is the founder of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching organization for creative professionals, and the author of 2 books. The Win Without Pitching Manifesto, published in 2010, has sold over 30,000 copies with annual sales increasing every year for 9 years straight. It is available at Amazon in hardcover, Kindle, and audio editions. Blair's newest book, Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour, published in January of 2018, is a comprehensive guide to value-based pricing for creative firms. It is available in multiple formats at pricingcreativity.com. Blair also hosts, with David C. Baker, the podcast Two Bobs, Conversations on the Art of Creative Entrepreneurship. According to the UK's The Agency Collective, Two Bobs is the second most listened to podcast by agency owners after The Tim Ferriss Show. Blair lives in the remote mountain village of Coslow, British Columbia, Canada, and he works and lectures throughout the world. He can be found at winwithoutpitching.com and on Twitter at Blair Enns. Welcome to the podcast, Blair. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Colleen. It's my pleasure to be here.
Is it Caslow or Coslow?
Well, we call it Caslow, although I was hiking with cultural anthropologist who does a lot of work with the First Nations around here, and he says they pronounce it Costlow.
Oh, okay.
To those of us who live here, it's Caslow.
Mm-hmm. Well, a colleague of mine, she said that, she posted in my group, in my Design Domination Facebook group, and she posted a pic with you. She just recently met you in Calgary. And so she wanted to know if you remember that shameless girl who asked you for a selfie. And that's her word, not mine.
I remember her very well. Yes.
Okay, great. She'll be happy to hear that. So, like I've heard so many designers say, and I'm included in this myself, the Win Without Pitching Manifesto has changed our lives and how we do business. And I have to first make my own proclamation about that book. And that is that there is no filler anywhere in this book. It is, every sentence is important. Every single sentence.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Shortly after it came out, I got an email from somebody who said, well, you're not a very good writer. You ramble on a lot. If you would like to hire me, I could help edit you. And I thought, I know I ramble a lot, especially when I speak, but I thought I did a pretty good job of being succinct in that book. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, I noticed in the dedication of the book that you say, and for Colette Habibti, and I know that that's Arabic. I used to know a few Arabic words. So do you speak that?
No, that's the only word I know. But when I was in the UAE doing some work many years ago now, somebody had used that word or described that word to me, and I don't know the meaning behind it. The way he described it was, may have been bringing some extra meaning to it, but I just thought it was one of the most lovely words I'd ever heard. And the way he described it, he said, it means my love, my world.
Yeah.
Is there a better word than that? I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot in Arabic music.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And the other thing I really liked about your book, and this is totally trivial, but
the random stuff.
I noticed right away that you used Mrs. Eves, and I always liked that font.
Yeah, when I conceived of the book and I hired a designer, I thought, well, this is for designers, so it has to be really well designed, or it has to be just about the words. So I hired a designer whose second business is designing typefaces for Bibles. And so he selected Mrs. Eves, and then there's some hand-drawn fonts in there that he drew himself. And he told me the story of Mrs. Eves, which looks a lot like Baskerville. And Mrs. Eves, do you know the story behind Mrs. Eves?
If I did, I don't remember it.
Mrs. Eves was Mr. Baskerville's housekeeper and lover.
Oh.
Yeah. So if I'm doing a presentation or something and for whatever reason I can't access Mrs. Eves or somebody else's doesn't have the font, I just have them switch it to Baskerville because they're very close.
Oh, interesting. Well, the only thing I don't like about it is that it doesn't have a long enough M dash.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. And that may have been on me because I think that book came out in 2010 when I didn't understand that there were dashes, N dashes, and M dashes. So maybe, is that true though? The M dash isn't long enough?
The M dash, well, when I look at the M dash in that font, it reminds me of an N dash, a normal N dash in another font. So I just think it's kind of short, but I'm picky about that kind of stuff.
Here we are geeking out on dash sizes. We've lost everybody, Colleen.
I did a whole podcast episode about that. It was quite popular.
Oh, really? Wow. I'm going to listen to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
That's great.
I would like to know first, was there a defining moment that caused you to take on, this mission of helping creatives in this way?
Well, the defining moment was I wanted to move to this little village in the middle of nowhere, British Columbia, and I needed to find a way to earn a living. So I decided to launch a consulting practice. And today, 17 years later, Win Without Pitching is a training company. But in 2002, when I launched it, it was a solo consulting practice.
Congrats.
Thank you. I wanted to launch a new business development consultancy. We use the S word, sales. But I know in the creative professions, we don't like to use that word. So we use new business. So I wanted to launch a consultancy. And the name came to me. And I don't remember how it came to me, but it was an aspirational goal for me. And at the time, the previous job I had where I was doing new business for a firm out in Western Canada, I had become fed up with the pitch and I had started to push back, but I hadn't validated much beyond, I hadn't come up with a lot of the principles and methodologies and frameworks that I use and teach today, but I had validated the idea that you don't have to just say yes when the client asks you to do something ridiculous. You can push back. You can ask to be treated differently.
Amen.
You can suggest an alternative way forward. So the big idea was validated. I had the point of view. And then when I sat down in 2001 to kind of launch the consulting practice, I started by writing. I think through my fingers. I'm a writer. So I wrote everything I knew about new business from this point of view. Ended up with a book that I published on my website. So it was self-published. It was simply called The Win Without Pitching Manual. And I sold it for $995 a copy.
Wow.
And that was available on my website from 2002 until 2010 when the Manifesto came out. And then I took it off the market. I don't even own a copy of it anymore. There are copies of it out there. I don't have the electronic files anymore. It's been essentially wiped from history. Although, again, I know a few people that have a copy. David Baker has a copy, but he won't give it to me.
Wow, that's amazing. $995.
Yeah.
So you're talking about sales, and many designers I find are still trying to sell like a salesman instead of actually demonstrating expertise. So what do you think are the best ways to demonstrate that expertise?
Yeah. Well, there are different ways to demonstrate expertise at different points in the sale. So ideally, we talk about in our training, we talk about the 4 conversations. This idea that it's helpful to view the sale as a series of 4 discrete linear conversations. Each conversation has a different objective and a different framework to navigate to that objective. So you simply ask, where am I in the sale? What conversation is this? What's the objective of this conversation? And what framework should I be using to navigate to the objective? And in that model, the first conversation that we have, we call it the probative conversation. And the objective of the probative conversation is for you to move in the mind of the client from the vendor position to the expert practitioner position. We talk about this moment. We call it the flip. The flip is the moment when you move in the mind of the client from a vendor with little power in the buy-sell relationship to the expert practitioner with some power to push back. So how you begin is... your question is, how do you prove expertise? The key to the probative conversation is it happens without you present. It happens through your agents of thought leadership and referrers. So those people, those clients who are referring business to you, and then also the content that you're putting out in the world. So the stuff that you put out in the world, your portfolio, if you're a designer or a creative, so you put out the finished product and say, I did that. And you also publish, you write, you podcast, you do YouTube videos, you speak, whatever the medium is, you create content marketing or thought leadership, and you put that out into the world. And that's how you begin. And then once you get into the sale with a client and they're asking you to demonstrate expertise, that's when you start to use case studies. And then the methods and the tools that you use basically change as you go through the arc of the sale. So if you want to think of like in the closing conversation, how can you communicate your expertise in the closing conversation without giving your thinking away for free, without pitching? You can offer a guarantee is one way. You can offer to break up the engagement into small steps and just take a small first step with you and then guarantee that first step, just some sort of satisfaction guarantee where if you're not happy, pay us, work with us. And if you're not happy after the first step, then we'll give you your money back. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can do this, and they essentially change as you move through the sale.
What if you do good work for them with that guarantee and they're just like, oh, well, I just don't like it, so I'm just not going to pay?
So the great thing about that scenario is you have to ask yourself the question, what happens if I do good work and somebody they don't personally like it, they're using the wrong criteria, or they're not that honorable? These are all great questions that you have to ask yourself. And one of the reasons a guarantee is so powerful is it forces you to ask yourself the question, should I really be doing business with this person? Because if you think this person is going to take advantage of that guarantee clause or just dismiss your work based on a sense of personal preference and maybe an uninformed kind of or low level of sophistication when it comes to judging work like yours, then that's not a person you should be doing business with. So a guarantee is a very helpful filter or kind of purifier of your client base. And usually it's you have to ask yourself that question. Well, what happened? Do I trust this person? Do I trust this person to pay me, to appreciate, to know good work when they see it, to value the fact that I'm the expert in the room here, to respect my right to do this my way while getting to an outcome that they agree with or sign off on? Do I trust this person with all of these things? These are questions you should be asking of yourself about your clients, whether you're offering a guarantee or not. And considering a guarantee just brings those questions to the forefront.
Yeah, and sometimes, they might have their act together, but there's another decision maker that you're not necessarily getting access to, and that person might, make a decision later and say, oh, well, we just don't want to pay for that. But this other person you were talking to might have been kind of honorable and upfront, but somebody else might have, nixed it.
So there's another guarantee forces you to do other things that you really should be doing anyway. Yeah. And one is identifying all of the decision makers, who has the authority to say yes, who has the authority to say no, and then include them in that conversation before you decide to offer a guarantee. So many problems in the sale happen because you're not getting to the right decision maker, and you've chosen to not ask the question, make the request, and you've chosen to just do business with the gatekeeper or intermediary. And we've all seen that movie. We know how it ends, right? So if you want to get better at the business side of your creative practice, whether you're running a small or medium firm or you're a solopreneur, one of the things that you need to get comfortable with is getting to the ultimate decision maker, asking to get to the ultimate decision maker.
Right. Now, you say in one part of Win Without Pitching Manifesto that our highest value offering is our ability to bring new perspective and understanding to our clients' problems. And so many designers miss this completely. Like, some of them are still selling the thing, the brochure, the website, and not like the result of what that is. And I'm sure you're seeing that a lot too.
Yeah, that description, that idea of like bringing a novel perspective to the problem, that's what creativity is. Creativity is not the ability to write or draw or to use InDesign. Creativity is the ability to see. Now, those other things are, they fall under the category of what Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, that's a mouthful, but he's a psychologist at the University of Chicago who studies creativity and happiness, and he coined the term flow state. And the flow state is the state when you're happiest. You're kind of lost in the task that you're doing or the endeavor that you're doing. You're challenged. You're pushed out to the edge of your abilities, but not beyond. You have a sense of mastery. That's when we're happiest, when we're challenged, but we still feel like we're in control. So Csikszentmihalyi talks about the ability to write and draw, et cetera, as a form of personal creativity. But creativity at the highest level is the ability to see. It's the ability to think about the problem differently. So just imagine that you're working for a client and the client comes to you and they're self-diagnosed. I understand what my problem is. And they're self-prescribed. I know what the solution is. And they come to you and all they want from you is to procure a solution. Give me a price to procure the solution. I'm self-diagnosed, self-prescribed. In a situation like that, you are asked to enter into an engagement where you are not allowed to bring your superpower to bear, because your superpower is the ability to think about the problem differently, which may lead you to a different solution.
Right.
And when the client takes that off the table, they impair your ability to do your best work.
They're kind of like, hey, you're just the order taker. You're not the expert.
Yep. I need 4 bids on this one very specific solution. You're one of 4.
Right. Well, I'm sure you'll agree that mindset can make all the difference, in your business. And, it can really feel like the chicken or the egg scenario. Like if you don't have the right mindset, then you end up taking on any work, you attract crappy clients, you don't enforce your boundaries, and so forth. Designers need to change our mindset, get paid first, talk money, and be confident so they can attract these better clients, right? So, one of my listeners submitted a question, and I thought this was a great question. Cassie asked, how do you recommend that new freelancers get into this mindset? How do they get their mindset in the right place to do these things?
I would say read the Win Without Pitching Manifesto.
Yes, of course. A prerequisite.
That's the Yes You Can book. That book is designed, it was written to get people into the right mindset. And you're absolutely right, Colleen. Mindset underpins everything. And I've only discovered that in the last 7 or 8 years, I think. I remember I used to think I can teach anybody how to sell. I can teach anybody how to do this. And I was wrapping up a day of sales training for a group in Sydney, Australia one day and taking questions. And the first question came from a woman who said, okay, now that I know what to do, how do I build up the courage to do this?
Right.
I don't remember my answer to the question, but I didn't have a good one. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I realized that was part of my frustration as a consultant, is I really believed the client had the problem. I had the solution. Here's the solution. Go do it. You'll have success. But it doesn't always happen that way. And when I thought about it long enough, I realized that this woman was taught a whole bunch of things to do in specific sales situation. Client does X, you do Y. And what she was saying is, I can't bring myself to do this. And the reason she couldn't imagine herself doing these things is it conflicted with her larger general pattern of behavior. So I'm advocating that you do things that any other expert or professional would do in a situation, like say what you're thinking, push back on things you don't agree with, ask for concessions, ask to get to the people who are going to make the decisions, and believe that you have a right to sit down with those people. And so people try this on and think, well, I have a hard time imagining me doing that because it conflicts with your vendor pattern.
Yeah.
I'm asking you to behave like the general expert. So what I say now is those points of sales process that will teach you, you can forget them and you'll still be fine as long as you behave, generally speaking, like the expert practitioner and not like the vendor. underpinning that is mindset. And it's really, I think of mindset as the conversations that you're having with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It really is the set of beliefs that you have and you build. And you do that through essentially saying things to yourself, or the conversations that you have with yourself. When you're thinking like the expert, then you will behave like the expert. And then if you can remember to apply these specific situations, you will be more successful. So we have a Jedi mantra that we have people recite. It's a bunch of statements put together. That's really just what you say to yourself to remind yourself that you have value here. You're the expert. The client, if you end up working with the client, they would be lucky to work with you. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. Your world's not going to collapse. But you're right. Everything comes down to mindset. Absolutely everything comes down to mindset.
Yeah. And like you were talking about a pattern, it's like, you might have had a client talk to you in the past a certain way, or, like you said, come to you and they're like, this is what I need. I just need an estimate. I don't need you to do anything else. I just want an estimate, and then you can do the work, And it's like you develop this pattern of behaving the way that you've been treated, like put into that position, because you're not making the change. And then once you do, it's like feels so amazing, because it's like, oh my gosh, this actually works. And now I'm getting more respect.
It's addictive, isn't it?
It is.
You start to push back. You start to ask for what you want. You start to get it, and you think, oh my God, things could be a whole lot better. And the sad thing is, there are some people who will go their whole careers as a designer or a creative of some kind who don't understand, A, how much value they add to the client's business really, and B, how much power they have in the buy-sell relationship that they've never really leveraged.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean leveraging power for the sake of ego or just for the sake of power itself. Leveraging power to change the way your services are bought and sold so that you can be in a position to create even greater value, and you can capture more of that value for yourself in the form of compensation.
Well, the other day in a Facebook group, I was horrified because somebody posted and they said they had submitted a proposal and it came down to just them and this other person, and the other person got picked. And so they asked the client, well, why did you pick the other person? And they were like, oh, well, they showed us some mock-ups with the proposal and their price was lower. So he's like, okay, so next time I'm going to start showing mock-ups with my proposals and, lower my price. And I'm like, no, stop, please just stop. Like, you shouldn't be doing spec work, and you shouldn't be lowering your prices just because somebody else won that work. Who cares? Like, let them go. You don't want that client anyways. And in your book, you say, no is the second best answer we can hear. We want to hear it as early in the buying cycle as possible. And it's so true. And you even say, we invite the client to say no early and often. Designers need to accept no is a good thing in a lot of situations.
Yeah, and one of the points there was, if the answer is no, you want to hear it as early as possible. You want to not overinvest in the sale. You want to get to the point where if you hear no, you think, oh, well, it's too bad this doesn't work out, and then you move on. And really, that's it. And the times when you're floored by the no has hurt you either personally or financially, your expectations were so high or your feelings were hurt or whatever it is. These are the times when we're over-invested in the sale. We're not pushing back. The client selection processes are unnecessarily long and arduous, and it's to their benefit to make them difficult, long and arduous. It's in their interest to have us invest in the sale, because then they can leverage sunk cost bias, which sees it very difficult for us to walk away once we've invested in something. So we feel like, well, we have already spent this time on this, and you're already invested emotionally. It's really hard to walk away. It also leverages loss aversion bias, which is a principle that says we value losing something about twice as much as we value winning it. So the longer you're engaged in trying to win the business, the more you mentally own it. You're essentially owning it the more work you do. And then you're imagining giving it up. So there's a couple of things going on. So you really do need to learn to push back early and be open to hearing no's early. So in a case of that example that you just gave, my first reaction was, well, if that's your reaction, you're not going to be in business very long.
Right, exactly.
That's how you're responding. Oh, okay. So more free work and lower prices. Got it. I hope that was just a moment of frustration, because even as a natural tendency, if you think, well, that's the way you win, well, you're just not thinking creatively or strategically enough.
Then you're always in a race to the bottom and nobody wins that.
Yeah. It's just all losers down at the bottom, right? So, but in that situation, the designer could have said early on, listen, if it's important for me to share a bunch of concepts with you, I'm not going to do that, before we're hired. But if you want to see, so two different things. I can show you examples of the work that I've done, and I can walk you through like how I arrived at these solutions. Or if you really do want to see what I would do, we could just break this into steps. And I could spend a little bit of time doing high-level concepts first, and I'll charge you X for that. And then once you sign off on, not the specific concept, but once I show you the small number of very high-level concepts, once you're confident that, okay, I think this is the right designer for me, she understands, we're going to get something good here, I feel it, then we can move to the next stage and you can pay me for the next stage. So there are all kinds of different ways to deal with this, but the key principle would be, if you can think of a reason why this deal might not happen, put it on the table as early as possible and ask the client to deal with it. Do a pre-mortem, come up with all of the reasons why you didn't win the business, and then put them on the table for the client to address. And in this case, it might be price. So before we go too far, you should know, like, I'm not the cheapest designer around. If you're talking to other designers, you're almost certainly going to be talking to somebody who's cheaper than us. So how important is price to you? Another might be, I don't do free work. I don't begin working on the assignment until I'm hired and I've received a deposit in advance. Is that an issue for you? And be honest. If it is, let me know. If you think there's a problem, put it on the table and ask the client, is there a problem here? And if the client says, well, yeah, there's a problem here, like I've already just kind of role played, there are ways that you can deal with them. But some of them are deal killers, right? Some of them might be, no, my budget's $1,000 and you're thinking it's $10,000. I need this logo for $1,000. Like maybe that's a deal killer. There are other ways to deal with that I talked about in my most recent book, Pricing Creativity, a guide to profit beyond the billable hour. But just sticking to the basics of how you navigate the sale, just go for the no early. No's early are your friends. And when you hear them late, they are your enemies.
Yeah, I mean, you really don't want to get into a proposal that you spent days on it and then you find out no. And then the whole thing with the spec work up front, it's like, how can you possibly come up with a proper solution at that stage?
You got it. Yeah.
I had a couple questions about pricing. One of them comes from one of my listeners named Chris, and he wanted to know what your take was about putting prices and packages on your website. I've shared my thoughts on this in the past, but
yeah, I love that question. Thank you for asking it, Chris. So there are two types of businesses for the purpose of this discussion. There are customized services business, where every engagement is a blank slate, is a creative act. And there are productized services businesses where the engagements tend to be similar. So productized services, they're product businesses and productized services business. Those are built for scale. A customized services business is not. Somewhere above 90%, approaching 100% of the people listening to this podcast are and probably should be running customized services businesses. So if you're a classic designer, there are a small number of clients that you can work with at any one time. And what you should be doing is you should be thinking of each engagement with that client as a creative act, where even if it's just a logo, the other things that go with the logo, the things that are important to this organization, everything is different. So you invest the time to learn about the organization and how you create value through this logo. So you spend more time in the sale in a customized services business, and you put together an engagement that is more customized to the client, and you follow the first rule in my pricing book: you price the client. On the other end of the spectrum, productized services businesses are built for scale. You have standard pricing, where you don't in customized services business. You have standard packages, and when somebody's talking to you about their challenge, all you can do is pick from the shelves to sell them whatever products you have. And it might make sense to put those services on your website. So you think of a SaaS company like HubSpot as an example. And they have standard packages on the website. You can buy on the website without talking to a salesperson. And there's no customized special price for you. You think of a HubSpot partner digital marketing firm who resells HubSpot, that is a customized services business. So the short answer, I know this is a long answer, the short answer is no, don't put prices or products on your website. I made that mistake when Without Pitching started as a consulting company. So in theory, it should have been a customized services business, but I quasi-productized my services like a lot of companies do. And I got caught in this mushy middle of a quasi-productized services company. And a lot of design firms end up there. You can make more money and have more impact if you go to one of the two ends of the spectrum. You embrace the fact that yours is a customized services business. You can only work with a small number of clients, and you price based on the value you create, not based on the inputs or the market value of the outputs. And the other end of the spectrum is you pursue scale and you build a company like you invent the logo designing machine, essentially. And that's a little bit tongue in cheek, but I know somebody on Twitter who's just launched this service that's basically it's $1,000 for a logo or something, and it's all productized, and you don't get all the customized conversations. You get a small number of revisions, etc. And that company is built for scale. You have to choose one or the other. And unless you come up with really valid reasons to go productized, yours is a customized services business. And the first rule of pricing is to price the client, not the service, not the job. Therefore, you do not put prices on your website. You might put minimum prices. Our engagements typically start at X, but that's about it.
Yeah, because you could have a big company come along and see that on your site, and they're like, oh, that's what I'm expecting to pay. But they could be this huge company, and they need like a huge brand guide and all this other stuff. And
yeah. And I ask in the book, what does a logo cost? And so if I ask a room full of designers, well, look, what's the price of a logo? The right answer is, well, that depends. But often somebody will say $5,000, and then somebody else yells out 10, and they get in this competitive thing. But the real answer is that depends. And then I say, well, what does it depend on? Is it the quality of the logo? Is it the amount of time it took? No, it's on the value of the logo to the company. And that's really hard to discern early on.
Yeah.
But then I talk about two examples. Nike paid $200 in today's money. It was $35 in 1971 for the Nike swoosh. And PepsiCo in 2008 paid $1 million to update the Pepsi brand. One is 5,000 times the price of the other. So, and their range is even bigger than that. And it really comes down to, what's the value of that logo to that company in that moment? PepsiCo, they could have been convinced to pay $20 million for their logo in that moment if it had been structured right. So price the client, not the service, not the job. You price the client. Rule number one of pricing creativity.
Now, when it comes to pricing design work and, taking into consideration a number of designs and rounds of revisions and all that stuff, you can charge a whole lot and not put a limit on it and either hope for the best or if it's a client that you've worked with, then you know what their MO is. Because it kind of reminds me of a story where I worked with a client years ago, and it was like the third round of revisions, and then she rewrote the whole brochure. And it was like everything had to be done again. It was it was a really complex brochure. And I was like, oh my God, I'm doing the whole thing over again. And I didn't charge her more for that. She literally said to me, well, I had another round of revisions left, so I wanted to, use them. It's like, wait, you just made changes just to make changes? I was blown away.
Wow. Yeah, there's a reason right there why you shouldn't price in the round of revisions.
Right. Well, I've since changed my contracts to say up to a certain number of revisions and of decreasing complexity. So what's your take about number of designs and then, the number of drafts that they get?
Well, I think to get to a good outcome, you need a good client and you need a good transparent working methodology. So a good client is somebody who you wouldn't have, I'm not suggesting you have to give a guarantee, but you would have no qualms about offering a guarantee to, because you've asked yourself the question, do I trust this person? Does she have good judgment? Does she seem to respect me, etc.? That's a good client. And then a good working process or methodology is you would explain to the client, this is how it works. You're going to hire me to do a brochure. Here's how it works. So first we do the onboarding meeting. I get all the basic information from you, whatever marketing materials you have, etc. Then we'll establish a timeline, whatever it is. And then I'm going to do initial high-level concepts. And then you're going to sign off on those high-level concepts. Like I'm talking about working transparently and collaboratively, which I talk about in the manifesto. The key here is you keep the client involved. You don't show up. I remember when I launched Win Without Pitching as a consulting practice, I hired a design firm and I hired them to design the first book, the Win Without Pitching manual, and my website and some other things. And I briefed them over the phone. And then they said, come see us in 6 weeks. And I went, okay. And I thought, what happens in 6 weeks? So there's no communication between me and them. We set up a time when I was going to go in to meet them. And I went into the meeting and I had no idea what we were going to do in the meeting. And they showed me 2, maybe 3 different creative directions. I think it was 2. I loved them both and I chose one. But for the entire 6-week period, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what they expected me to do. And they basically made a whole bunch of guesses and said, all right, here it is. Which one do you like? They were good designers. They came highly recommended to me. But the way they worked was horrible. Like I was drowning in buyer's remorse because I was left all alone. So your working methodology should explain, here's where we show you things. Here's where you sign off. Once you sign off on this, then if you change your mind after that, then that's a change of scope and we're going to have to sign a change order, etc. So you need a good client that you trust. You need open collaborative communication. And you need a working methodology that is open and transparent, and you communicate that to the client. It's like, here's how we're going to work together. And when the client comes back to you and says, well, I had another revision, so I rewrote the brief, that's when you say, wait a minute, stop. No.
Right.
You agreed on the direction previously. So if you want me to do this, that's another job. That's an entirely different scope. I'm happy to do this for you. I don't understand why, but if you want me to do it, you have to pay me to do this. Do you want me to do this? The earlier in your career you learn to have these direct conversations, the better off you will be.
So true. So one of my listeners, Michael, says that the Manifesto book, is nearly a decade old. So if you were to put out a 2020 version, how would it be different? And what have you learned on the topic in the past decade that you would like to share?
There's only one thing I would change about the Manifesto. So the audio, it's 9 years old, and the audio version just came out last week or 2 weeks ago, maybe. So that's what I would do. I would release the audio version earlier. When I wrote my first book, I had a preface, I had an introductory chapter explaining my use of pronouns and why I selected the male pronoun. I would always say he when I meant an individual. And I said, I mean it as the royal he. I don't like alternating between he and she. And as a writer, I abhor using they for the singular.
Right.
And then even when I recorded I didn't record it, so my director of coaching narrated this, Shannon Lee, and when she recorded it, we had the question before she went in to record, do we change the gender pronouns? Because every once in a while, do we change the pronouns to be gender neutral or alternate back and forth? And there are only 2 places in the book I used female pronouns. And the decision was, no, let's keep the audio true to the original text. And if I had to do it over again, I would alternate he and she, as I do now and as I have been for years. That's the only change I would make. I would change nothing else.
So all the content would be the same.
When you look at the book, I wrote it and it was designed to be timeless. I wanted this book to outlast me. I wanted somebody to be able to pick it up today and 50 years from today and for it to be just as relevant. And there are frameworks that I've developed. So there are frameworks that I still use that are alluded to in the book. It's not a book of frameworks, really. And there are frameworks like the 4 conversations that I mentioned to you that have been developed since that book that aren't alluded to in there. Probably if I were doing it again today, I might allude to some of those more modern to me frameworks, but it wouldn't fundamentally change anything, the core content.
Well, this next question, I appreciated it because I live in a small rural area that's about an hour away from where my clients are. And so Jason asked, well, he said he grew up not far from Kaslo and asked why you live there and how it's helped or hindered your business in any way.
Well, if he grew up not far from here, he knows why I chose here, because it's a beautiful part of the world. The physical environment it's physically stunning, mountains, lakes, etc. And the people are fascinating and beautiful and freaky. I always say, if you feel like you don't belong anywhere in the world, you probably have a home here. So that's why I live here. And I think the second question was, has it helped or hindered? It's absolutely helped me. I don't know if I could do what I do if I didn't live here. And I know I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't live here. My location is a massive part of my identity. And I've written about this. There's an article on winwithoutpitching.com somewhere about this, and I forget what it's called. But it's got an aerial view of Kaslo and an aerial view of Manhattan, and they look eerily similar, although quite different. I always say when I go to New York, I can only stay for a few days, because if I'm there longer than a few days, I start to believe what people say. They say things like, you can't win without pitching. I don't read the trade publications. I don't read Ad Age, Ad Week, I don't read any of that stuff. I purposefully work hard to keep information out. I don't read books on selling. I've read a lot on pricing. That's an area I had to do a lot of research. So there are areas where I just work really hard to keep information out, because I feel like I've got this valuable removed perspective that gets tainted the longer I'm in. I just pick New York as an example, London, pick any other major market where that's kind of a regional epicenter of the design or creative or advertising professions. I just can't stay there too long. I feel like living where I live gives me a point of view. It allows me to see that the industry is crazy. It's insane. What it falls under the category of standard practices for how clients hire a designer and the things that designers and design firms are willing to do to get work. They're insane. Right. And you don't know, if you've been doing this in the beginning, you think, oh, that's how it's done? Okay, weird, but okay, I'll do it that way. And then after not too long, you're the person saying, well, that's just the way it's done. And I'm telling you from the outside looking in, it's insane. Just talk to your friends who do other things for a living. Talk to them about how you sell, about what you give away, about how you give away all your power. They'll look at you like you're nuts.
Right. You said in one of your podcast episodes that you could probably live in Hobart, Tasmania.
Yeah.
What is it about that city in Tasmania?
So Tasmania is in the bottom part of Australia. So it's the south down there is cold. It's flipped, right? So it's colder. It's small. It's rural, but the city's kind of this vibrant, cool little city. I don't know. It's just a place where I felt at home. I could live in Hobart. I could live in parts of Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, which is on Vancouver Island, if I had to pick cities. I love visiting cities. I just, I would have to be able to live in a place that was still kind of somewhat disconnected from the rest of the world in some way.
I hear you. So tell us a little bit about pricing creativity.
Aha. So I mentioned I don't read books on selling. I own lots of books on selling. I've never read any of them. I've flipped through some of them. Actually, that's not true. I think I've read Mahan Khalsa's Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. But that would be the only one I've read cover to cover on selling. Pricing, when I discovered, I had a few moments where I realized, wow, I don't really understand the subject of pricing or of value. And I thought, well, I ordered 3 books. I thought I'll read up on it and learn what I don't know. And I realized the first book was a bit of a throwaway. I didn't get much from it. The second book was Ronald J. Baker's book, Pricing on Purpose. And it's an excellent book, and he's an excellent writer. So I kind of immediately fell in love with the subject of pricing. I realized pricing isn't, it's part science, but it's a lot of art. And the field of pricing is really as big as the entire field of judgment and decision making. So it encompasses behavioral economics, behavioral psychology, and a whole bunch of other fields. So I just kept buying books, and then I would start to apply what I learned. And then one day a friend said, yeah, you should write a book on pricing. And I said, yeah, there's a lot of great books written on pricing. And he said to me, and he owns a small agency, he said, your clients are never going to read those books. And I thought, hey, he's right. So I love the theory. Like, I've read a lot of books on the underlying theory. They're kind of textbooks that most designers wouldn't read. And then in Pricing Creativity, which came out in January of 2018, I endeavored to take all of the underlying principles and just communicate the smallest number of them. Here's what designers need to know about the underlying principles of pricing. And that was the first section of the book. So I broke it into 4 sections: principles, rules, tips, and tools. So there's the underlying principles, so you don't have to read all these books. Then there's 6 rules that I conceived of, these 6 rules that you should follow every time. And then there's a series of tips for a specific situation. And in the manual version, which I have here on my desk, and I really conceived of this as a manual to sit on your desk. It comes in a 3-ring binder. There's a tool section.
Be sure to save a copy of that one.
Yeah, no worries there. I have a few dozen copies lying around here. Yeah, so that was the genesis of the book. I felt like I didn't know anything about pricing, and I endeavored to learn what I didn't know. And I think that journey began 7 or 8 years ago now, and the book has been out for about 18 months.
Okay, cool. Well, this has been super insightful. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Colleen. It's really been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I love talking to your audience. I especially like the audience of the solo creative, the solo designer early in their career.
If you liked this content, please leave a review and share it on social media. Do you need help enhancing your design skills or working through a freelancing issue? Go to creative-boost.com to apply for design mentoring. Also, check out the free resources and join us in the Design Domination Facebook group.